The man in the expensive suit didn't even look up from his phone. "Get lost, kid," he muttered, waving his hand like Leo was a mosquito. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." Leo stood beside booth number 7, clutching a worn-out teddy bear with one glass eye and a missing left ear. He had already been turned away from 4 tables. Donna the waitress had already told him twice that he needed to leave before the manager saw him. But Leo didn't have the luxury of giving up. Not tonight. Not when Lily's heart was running out of time. "It's a really good bear, sir," Leo tried again, his voice barely rising above the country music playing from the corner speaker. "He's brave and—" I said beat it. The man finally looked up, and when he saw the threadbare stuffed animal and the small, earnest face holding it, something ugly crossed his expression, not pity, but contempt. He let out a short, sharp laugh and turned to the woman across from him. "Can you believe this? $2,000 for a busted toy." The woman looked away, uncomfortable. "He's worth $2,000, Leo said quietly. "That's what I need. For my sister's operation." The man stared at him for a long moment, then laughed again, louder this time. A few nearby diners glanced over. "That's rich, kid. That's really rich." He pointed toward the door. "Now scram before I call someone to remove you." Leo didn't move right away. He looked the man in the eye for exactly 3 seconds. A gaze so steady and serious it didn't belong on a 7-year-old face, and then he turned away. He wouldn't cry. Crying was for later, when no one could see him. The diner door swung open with a gust of cold October air. The leather-clad giant smelled of gasoline, stale tobacco, and violets. To anyone else in the neon-lit diner, Jack's Iron Miller, sergeant-at-arms of the local Hells Angels chapter, was a walking nightmare. 6'4", 240 pounds of scarred muscle and hard years, his leather cut worn like battle armor. The grinning skull patch on his back faded from 2 decades of sun and rain. People looked away when he walked in. The man in the expensive suit had his eyes back on his phone before Jax even reached the counter. Donna the waitress took a shaky breath and reached for her order pad. But 7-year-old Leo didn't look away. He didn't see the scars, the skull tattoos, or the heavy combat boots that struck the linoleum like small earthquakes with every step. He didn't see the danger or the darkness that everyone else in the room felt instinctively. He just saw a very big man who might have a very big wallet. Leo squared his shoulders, clutched his bear tighter against his chest, and marched forward. "Excuse me, sir." Jack stopped. He was reaching for a bar stool, and when that small voice hit him from below, he looked down with the kind of expression usually reserved for things that surprised him, which wasn't many things anymore. A boy, 7, maybe 8 years old. Oversized gray t-shirt, jeans with a hole at the knee, sneakers that had been white about 100 washes ago. And in his arms, a stuffed bear that had clearly lived a full and difficult life. One glass eye clouded over, left ear missing, a patchwork of mismatched stitching across its belly. "Would you like to buy my bear?" Leo's voice trembled, but his eyes were fierce. Not desperate, fierce. There was a difference. "He's very brave. I need $2,000. My sister's heart is stopping, and the doctors won't fix it unless I pay them." The entire diner went very quiet. Jax paused, his beer halfway to his lips. He looked at the kid, then at the pathetic stuffed animal, then at the kid again. He had spent his whole life breaking things. Buildings, bones, men who thought they were tougher than they turned out to be. He had ridden through storms and bar fights in courtrooms and graveyards. He had held his own son's hand in a hospital room 16 years ago and watched the monitors go flat. And he had walked out of that building a different man, harder, colder, sealed shut like a vault. He never expected a 7-year-old boy to ask him to fix something. Jack set his beer down slowly. "What's his name?" he asked. His voice was a rumble, low, rough, like gravel rolling down a hillside. Leo blinked. Of all the questions he had expected, that was not one of them. "Barnaby. Barnaby." Jax studied the bear with what appeared to be genuine consideration. "He brave enough to handle being owned by someone like me?" "He's the bravest bear in the world," Leo said. "He sat next to Lily in the hospital for 18 days and never ran away. Not once." Something moved behind Jax's eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his leather cut, pulled out a money clip thick enough to choke a man, and peeled off 5 bills without blinking. "Keep the bear, kid." He held out the cash. "Here's the money." Leo looked at it. His mouth went tight. "I can't keep the bear and take the money, sir. That's not how selling works." Jack stared at him. Then, slowly, something that might have been a smile, or the memory of one, passed across his face. "No, I guess it isn't." He took Barnaby carefully in both hands, treating the battered toy with a gentleness that seemed almost absurd coming from those scarred, calloused fingers. He tucked it into the front of his leather cut, one glass eye peeking out. Deal. Now take the money. Leo counted it, carefully, seriously, like a businessman closing an important transaction, and his expression shifted into one of profound disappointment. This is only 500, sir. I know. I need 2,000. I know that too. Jax turned back toward the bar. Life's hard, kid. Get used to it. Leo stood still for a moment. Then he nodded, just once, like he had filed that information away, and went back to his seat by the window, where a half-eaten plate of fries had gone cold. He had $1,500 left to find. He still had time. Jax ordered his beer and didn't think about it. At least, that's what he told himself. 30 minutes later, Jax laid $2 bills on the counter, nodded at Donna, who exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the whole time, and pushed out through the diner's glass door into the cold night air. The parking lot smelled like asphalt and diesel. His bike sat where he'd left it, third spot from the entrance, a 2019 Harley-Davidson Road King, matte black with chrome accents that caught the neon glow of the diner's sign. 117 cubic inches of American iron, the one thing in his life he trusted absolutely. He zipped his cut, pulled on his gloves, and swung his leg over the saddle. Wait, mister. Stop. Jax paused, one hand on the throttle. Leo came sprinting out of the diner like something was chasing him, sneakers slapping the wet pavement, the diner door crashing open behind him. Donna appeared in the doorway with a dish towel in her hand, looking alarmed. Barnaby has a maintenance schedule, Leo shouted, waving a folded piece of paper. I wrote it down. He needs his stuffing fluffed every Sunday, and his eye wiped off once a week, or it gets. He was 10 feet away from the bike when he stopped. Leo had been moving fast, too fast for caution, his whole focus on the paper in his hand. But as he rounded the front of a pickup truck parked beside Jax's Harley, he nearly stumbled over a man crouched low in the shadow between the vehicles. A thin man in dark clothes, hood pulled up, who was straightening up very quickly from a position that put him directly beside Jax's rear wheel. Their eyes met. The man bolted. Leo didn't understand everything about what he'd seen. He didn't know the technical term for what happens when someone cuts a motorcycle's rear brake cable. But he understood, with the crystalline certainty that children sometimes possess in moments that matter most, that the man had been doing something very bad to the very big man's very big bike. And the very big man was about to ride it. Don't start it. Leo's voice hit a pitch that cut through the ambient noise of traffic and the diner's exhaust fans. He covered the remaining distance at a dead sprint and wrapped both arms around Jax's left leg, all 48 pounds of him, clinging with everything he had. Don't start it. Someone was under your bike. He ran away. Don't start it. Jax's hand froze on the key. He looked down at the boy attached to his leg. Then he looked in the direction Leo was pointing, at the far end of the parking lot, where a shadow slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence and disappeared into the alley beyond. Jax's jaw hardened to granite. Let go of my leg, he said, his voice very quiet. Leo released him immediately and stepped back, breathing hard, the maintenance paper now crumpled in his sweating fist. Jax stepped off the bike and crouched beside it, pulling a small flashlight from his vest pocket with practiced efficiency. He ran the beam along the undercarriage in a methodical sweep, the kind of examination that comes from a lifetime of knowing that machines can kill you if you don't respect them. He found it in 7 seconds. The rear brake line had been cut, not frayed, not worn, but cleanly severed with a blade, the way a professional does it. At low speed, it might have only made the bike harder to control. On the highway, at the speed Jax typically rode, he stayed crouched for a moment, very still, the flashlight beam steady on the clean cut of the line. Then he straightened up and looked at Leo. The boy was standing in the glow of the parking lot lights, maintenance paper clutched in both hands, still breathing hard, watching him with those serious, ancient eyes. You saw his face? Jax asked. Leo shook his head. The hood was up, but he was skinny, and he had a snake tattoo on his wrist. I saw it when he stood up. A snake eating its own tail. Jax went very still in a different way. A snake eating its own tail. Ouroboros. He knew exactly one person in this city with that tattoo. Go back inside, Jax said. His voice was controlled now, contained, a lid pressed down hard on something volcanic. Tell the waitress I said give you whatever you want off the menu. Tell her Iron said so. Leo didn't move. Are you going to be okay? Yeah. Jax looked at him for a long moment. The wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance, a freight train horn called out across the city. "Yeah, kid. Thanks to you." He pulled out his phone and made a call while Leo slowly walked back toward the diner, looking over his shoulder twice. Jax watched him go, then raised the phone to his ear and waited. When the voice on the other end picked up, Jax spoke 2 sentences. "Get the inner circle together. We have a problem with Viper." The clubhouse was a converted automotive warehouse on the east side, behind a junkyard the chapter had owned for 15 years. By the time Jax arrived, on a borrowed bike, because his own was evidence now, 8 men were already waiting in the main room, seated around the long oak table that had presided over every chapter meeting since the place was built. These were the men Jax trusted. Tank, the president, 62 years old and built like his namesake. Diesel, the road captain, who could ride 18 hours without stopping. Ghost, the chapter's oldest and most taciturn member, who had survived things that would have broken most men twice. 6 others. Not Viper. Viper, real name Danny Reyes, sergeant-at-arms before Jax had taken the patch, was not there, which told Jax everything he needed to know about where Danny's loyalties currently stood. Jax set a clear plastic bag on the table. Inside it was a 6-inch section of brake line, sheared through with a blade. Clean. Surgical. "Tonight," he said. He never needed to raise his voice. "Someone cut my rear brake line in the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. The Ouroboros tattoo." The room went very quiet. Ghost set down his coffee cup. "You sure?" Think asked. 7-year-old kid saw him. Described the snake eating its own tail before I even mentioned it. Jack sat down. "I've suspected Viper for 3 weeks. The missing cash from the Galloway fund. The new faces hanging around the prospect's compound who nobody vouched for. I should have moved sooner." What followed was 2 hours of a different kind of violence. The cold, methodical kind practiced by men who understand the machinery of loyalty and its betrayal. Phone calls were made and verified. Accounts were examined. A prospect who'd been running messages for Viper without fully understanding their content was brought in and spoken with. Carefully at first, then less so. By the end, the shape of it was clear. Viper had made contact 4 months ago with a cartel operative looking to use the chapter's distribution network for something far darker than the chapter had ever touched. Viper had agreed, told no one, and decided that the only obstacle between himself and a great deal of money was the man who had been blocking that kind of business for 20 years. The brake line was the second attempt. A supposed riding accident on a rural highway 3 weeks earlier, written off as bad luck at the time, had been the first. "What do you want to do?" Fink asked. "He's out," Jack said flatly. "Permanently and completely. His patch, his property, his access. He leaves the city and stays gone, or he answers for it in a way that doesn't involve anyone going to prison." He paused. "We're not touching drugs. Not now, not ever. Any man who disagrees with that can walk out that door right now." Nobody moved. Viper was brought in an hour later by 3 members who'd gone to collect him. He didn't come quietly. The confrontation that followed was brief and unambiguous, and it ended with Viper stripped of his patches on the clubhouse floor, understanding very clearly that the deal he'd made was now void, and that he had 48 hours to leave the state. Jax watched it all with the detached focus of a man running a necessary and unpleasant piece of maintenance. When it was done, he sat alone at the oak table for a long time in the quiet that followed. On the table in front of him was Barnaby the bear, retrieved from his cut, sitting upright with its remaining glass eye catching the overhead light. He thought about a boy who had walked up to the scariest man in the room because he had no other choice. He thought about a little girl named Lily with a failing heart. He thought about a hospital room 16 years ago, and a different small hand, and a different set of monitors going silent. Jax picked up Barnaby and looked into its one clouded eye for a long moment. Then he stood up. St. Carmichael Medical Center occupied a full city block downtown, its glass facade reflecting the gray October sky and panels of cold light. Jax arrived at 10 in the morning, having slept 4 hours and changed into the closest thing he owned to civilian clothes: dark jeans, a flannel shirt, and a leather jacket without the chapter patches. He left the helmet on the bike. He found Leo in the pediatric ICU waiting room on the 4th floor, a small figure in a plastic chair far too large for him, knees drawn up to his chest, wearing the same gray t-shirt from the night before. The maintenance paper with Barnaby's care instructions was folded on the chair beside him. He had fallen asleep. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the details. The vending machine in the corner with a handwritten, out-of-order sign taped over the payment slot. The motivational poster on the wall with a sunset that had faded to brownish yellow. the industrial carpet worn smooth by years of anxious feet. A nurse at the desk glanced up at him with visible alarm, then seemed to recalculate when he didn't do anything threatening. He crossed to Leo's chair and sat down in the adjacent one, which creaked loudly. Leo's eyes opened. He looked at Jax, then at Barnaby, tucked in the crook of Jax's elbow, then back at Jax. "You're here," Leo said. The way he said it, flat, unsurprised, like he had simply been waiting, tugged at something old and rusted in Jax's chest. "Told you I'd look after the bear," Jax said. Leo sat up, pushing his hair out of his eyes. There were shadows under them that no 7-year-old should have. "Lily's in prep. The cardiologist says the valve replacement is urgent. They scheduled it for day after tomorrow, but he stopped. Swallowed. But there's a money thing." "I know," Jax said. "Tell me anyway." Leo told him. He spoke carefully, the way he did everything. Not like a child repeating overheard adult conversation, but like someone who had absorbed the reality of it completely. The surgery cost $38,000. Their mother had passed 2 years ago. They lived with their Aunt Carmen, who worked 2 jobs and had already spent everything she had. Insurance covered a portion, but the deductible and specialist fees amounted to a number that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The hospital had agreed to proceed pending a good faith payment of $20,000 within 48 hours. Otherwise, Lily would be transferred to the county facility, which had a 3-month waiting list for cardiac surgeries. Lily did not have 3 months. "I have $1,500, Leo said. He said it without self-pity, a pure statement of fact, the way a general might report the remaining strength of his forces. "I'm going to go back to the diner tonight, and the grocery store parking lot, and the bus station." Jax looked at him for a long time. "You saved my life last night," Jax said finally. Leo blinked. "I just saw a man by your bike. You saw something you didn't understand, and instead of walking past it, you ran back and grabbed on." Jax set Barnaby on the chair between them. Most grown men wouldn't have done it. Leo thought about this carefully. Because they were scared of you? Because they didn't want to get involved. Jax leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The world is full of people who see something wrong and decide it's not their problem. You didn't do that. A beat of silence. "The man with the snake tattoo. Did you take care of it?" Leo asked. "Yeah." Leo nodded, accepting this completely. He reached out and straightened Barnaby's remaining ear. "Good. I want to see Lily," Jax said. They did not, initially, let him in. The charge nurse, a solid woman named Patricia who had clearly dealt with her share of difficult people, looked at Jax's size and tattoos and the controlled energy he carried and said, very firmly, that family only, and she would need ID. Jax looked at her steadily. "How's your unit's equipment fund?" Patricia blinked. "I'm sorry, your unit. The pediatric ICU. I've seen 3 pieces of outdated monitoring equipment since I walked down that hall. Is that a funding issue or a procurement issue?" Patricia stared at him for a long moment, recalibrating. Funding has been tight. "I'll make a note of it," Jax said. "Can I see the girl?" Patricia looked at Leo, who looked back at her with those quiet, serious eyes. She sighed, checked the hallway in both directions, and stepped aside. Lily was small. That was the first thing. She was very small, even for 5, lost against the white hospital pillows with tubes and wires mapping her tiny chest like a circuit diagram. Her hair was dark like Leo's, spread around her head in a messy halo. She was asleep. She looked, Jax thought, like something made of glass placed in a world made of stone. He stood in the doorway and did not think about another hospital room, another face on another pillow. He would not think about that. He made himself not think about it. Leo sat in the chair beside the bed and took Lily's hand with the automatic ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Jax set Barnaby carefully on the bedside table, propped against the water pitcher, facing the bed. "Okay," Jax said. Leo looked up. "You saved my life," Jax said, his voice low and even. "Now it's my turn. I'm going to get the money for Lily's surgery." He met the boy's gaze. "I promise." Leo looked at him for a long time with those serious, measuring eyes. "Okay," Leo said at last. And then, in a smaller voice, "Thank you." Jax nodded once, turned, and walked out. He came back that afternoon wearing his full cut, patches and all, and asked to speak with the hospital administrator, and was told Mr. Aris was in a meeting. He sat down in the lobby and waited with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that waiting was just another form of pressure. Dr. Gerald Aris kept him waiting for an hour and 15 minutes. Aris was 50 years old and looked it in the precise, deliberate way of men who have spent their careers behind desks, making numerical decisions about other people's pain. Trim, silver-haired, expensively suited. He regarded Jax as he descended the mezzanine stairs with the very specific brand of barely concealed contempt reserved for people he considered beneath consideration. He sat down across from Jax in the lobby seating area and opened a thin folder. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I understand you're here about the Nguyen child." "Reyes Nguyen," Jax said. "Lily, 5 years old. Congenital aortic valve stenosis, scheduled for replacement surgery." Eris glanced at the folder. "Yes, I'm aware of the case. I'm also aware that the family has not met the pre-operative financial requirements. $20,000. 48 hours, Jax said. "I heard. Then I'm not sure what there is to discuss." Eris folded his hands on the folder. "Our policies exist to ensure the sustainable operation of this institution. We have great compassion for all patients. Does compassion have a minimum deposit?" Eris paused. Something shifted in his expression. A brief recalibration between the genuine irritation of a man who does not like being interrupted and the political caution of a man aware that the person interrupting him is very large. "The family has options," he continued. "County General has an excellent cardiac program. County has a 12-week waiting list." Jax kept his voice level. "Lily Reyes Nguyen's cardiologist has rated her condition as critical. 12 weeks is not an option, Dr. Eris." "The money will be here," Jax said, "before the deadline." Eris studied him for a moment with the careful look of a man performing a private calculation. "And if it isn't? Then we'll have a different conversation." A silence stretched between them. Eris closed his folder. "I appreciate your advocacy, Mr. Miller. But I want to be clear. Our financial policies are non-negotiable. If the required funds are not received by Thursday at 9 a.m., Lily Reyes Nguyen will be transferred to County General at 8 a.m. We have a legal and administrative obligation. You have a child in a bed upstairs with a failing heart," Jax said quietly. "Everything else is paperwork." He stood up. Eris leaned back involuntarily. Jax gave him one more look, long, quiet, comprehensive, and then walked out through the lobby's glass doors without another word. That evening, Leo sat in the waiting room with his Aunt Carmen, a tired woman in nursing scrubs who smelled of antiseptic and loved her nephew with an exhausted, bone-deep ferocity, and watched the hallway where Jax had walked away. At 7 p.m., a nurse came in. Not Patricia, a younger one, with careful eyes and the expression of someone delivering news she wishes she didn't have to deliver. "Mrs. Carmen Reyes?" Carmen looked up. "I'm very sorry to tell you this," the nurse said, and her voice was genuinely sorry, which only made it worse. "Dr. Eris has notified us that due to the outstanding balance on Lily's account, the surgical slot for day after tomorrow will be released unless full preoperative payment is received by Thursday morning. If the payment cannot be made, Lily will need to be transferred to County General by 8 a.m. Thursday." Carmen closed her eyes. "She can't wait 3 months, Carmen said, her voice very steady and very quiet, the steadiness of someone who has been holding themselves together for so long that steadiness has become structural. The cardiologist said, "I know," the nurse said. "I'm so sorry. If you can get any portion of the amount together, that would help us make the case to administration for an extension." "We've given everything," Carmen said. "I've sold everything." Leo, who had been sitting very still throughout this exchange, stood up. He walked to the corner of the waiting room and sat down on the floor with his knees pulled to his chest and held himself there, and looked at the industrial carpet, and thought about Barnaby's glass eye on the nightstand next to Lily's bed, and Jax's voice saying "I promise." Then, quietly, because he was alone in the corner and no one could see, he put his face in his hands and let himself cry. Just for a minute. He allowed himself exactly 1 minute. Then he wiped his face on his sleeve, stood up, and went to sit back down next to Carmen. He had to believe in the promise. The Hells Angels weekly full chapter meeting happened every Wednesday evening at the warehouse clubhouse, and it began the same way it always did. The chapter president taking his place at the head of the oak table, 61 patched members settling into their seats with the ritual ease of men who have done this many times. 62 attended tonight. Tank called the meeting to order, ran through the routine items, road captain's report, treasury update, a permit issue for the winter rally, and then nodded at Jax. "You called an all hands," Tank said. "Floor is yours." Jax stood up. He didn't say anything for a moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and set something on the table. Barnaby the bear sat upright in the middle of the oak table that had hosted 30 years of chapter meetings. One glass eye, one missing ear, patchwork seams. The kind of toy that a child loves so absolutely that the love becomes visible in every worn thread and faded piece of fabric. 61 men looked at it. 2 nights ago, Jack said, Viper tried to kill me. He let that sit. The room was already quiet, but it became a different kind of quiet, the kind that has weight in it. He cut my rear brake line in the Sunrise Diner parking lot. At highway speed, it would have done the job. No one spoke. I found out because a 7-year-old boy saw the man doing it and ran out of a diner to stop me, grabbed my leg, and wouldn't let go. Jax looked at the bear. His name is Leo. His sister is 5 years old. Her name is Lily. She has a heart defect that will kill her if she doesn't get surgery before the end of this week. He paused. The hospital wants $20,000 before they'll do it. The family doesn't have it. The room stayed quiet, but it was not the same quiet as before. It was the quiet of men doing the same math at the same time. Leo came to that diner trying to sell his teddy bear to raise money, Jack said. He walked up to me, of all the people in that room, and he looked me straight in the eye. He picked up the bear. He saved my life. He saved this chapter. If Viper's plan had worked, we'd be 6 months into a cartel partnership right now and looking at federal charges inside of a year. He held Barnaby up. A kid with a one-eyed toy bear walked into the scariest room he could find and held this club together. He set the bear back down. Lily's surgery is day after tomorrow. The hospital will transfer her to County General Thursday morning if the money isn't there. I don't need to tell you what that means. Ghost spoke for the first time, his voice like old gravel. What's the total? Surgery and immediate post-operative care, around $38,000. They'll proceed with $20,000 as a deposit and a payment plan for the rest. Ghost nodded once. He reached into his jacket and put an envelope on the table. Diesel did the same. Then Tank. Then, one by one, around the table, men pulling out wallets, reaching into vest pockets, some pulling out phones to transfer from accounts. There was no drama in it. It was simply the arithmetic of men who had decided something. In 10 minutes, the table held envelopes and folded bills totaling $26,000. Jax looked at it. That's for the deposit, he said, his voice not quite steady. Any surplus goes to the full cost. Count it in, Tank said. He looked around the table. Anyone not in? Nobody moved. Okay. Tank looked at Jax, and a slow, wide smile crossed his face, the kind he hadn't worn in a while. You want to deliver it? I want to do it right, Jax said. He looked at the money, and then at the bear. I want all of you there. Every last one. I want Eris to understand exactly who he's dealing with. When have we ever done anything small? Tank said. Jax picked up Barnaby and put it back in his cut. Wednesday night. We ride at 10. The city at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday had a particular rhythm to it. The last of the restaurant crowds thinning out, delivery trucks working the emptier streets, a handful of police cruisers doing their rounds with the unhurried patience of the overnight shift. At 10:03 p.m., that rhythm broke. It began as a sound, felt before it was heard, a vibration in the sternum, a deep frequency rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. People stopped on sidewalks and looked around, uncertain. A woman walking her dog paused in the middle of the block, her dog pressing against her legs. A man at an outdoor cafe table looked up from his phone. Then the lights appeared. Around the corner of Meridian Avenue and 7th Street, one headlight. Then 2. Then 10, 20, 50. A river of white light pouring around the corner like something geological, something that had been building for a long time and could not be stopped once it started. The thunder of engines built from an abstraction into something physical, something that pushed against the chest and vibrated in the teeth. And then the full column came into view and the sheer scale of it stopped traffic. 220 Hells Angels rode in a formation 2 abreast, stretching back 6 city blocks from the lead bike. Jax, Iron, Miller at the point, Tank riding to his left, Ghost directly behind. Every patch member of the chapter, plus a dozen respected associates who'd heard about it through back channels and shown up asking to ride. Men and women, young and old. Every background and every story converging on this particular Wednesday night for this particular purpose. They were not racing. They were not weaving. They were riding with the precise, measured pace of a formal procession, slower than they usually moved, more controlled, engines at a sustained roar rather than a wide-open scream. Every rider in formation, every headlight aimed forward. It was spectacular and it was terrifying and it was, in its way, beautiful. Officer Delia Reyes was 3 blocks north when the call came over dispatch. Possible large-scale gathering, Meridian and 7th, proceeding southbound. She pulled out of her lane, hit her lights, and made the turn expecting almost anything except what she actually found. An enormous, perfectly ordered column of motorcycles moving in complete discipline relative to their number, obeying every traffic signal, yielding at every cross street, proceeding with such deliberate and organized calm that the words possible gathering seemed entirely inadequate. She pulled alongside the column and keyed her radio. Dispatch, I have visual on the procession. Advise, approximately 200 or more motorcycles, 2 abreast, proceeding southbound on Meridian. They are following all traffic laws. No aggression observed. No visible violations. A pause. I don't know what to call this. Dispatch came back. Can you determine destination? Reyes looked ahead. St. Carmichael Medical Center was 6 blocks south. I think I can, she said. Word spread the way things spread in the age of phones. Instantly. People recorded from windows and sidewalks. Someone live-streamed from the roof of a bar on 5th Street, with 20,000 viewers within 12 minutes. The headline that would run in the morning read, 200 bikers descend on downtown hospital. But the people who were actually there would describe it differently. They would say it was like watching a tide roll in, inevitable and immense, carrying its own gravity, impossible to look away from. The lead bikes turned into the hospital's main access drive at 10:21 p.m. The parking lot held perhaps 80 vehicles. The column filled it, and when it was full, they lined the access road, and when that was full, they parked in controlled rows along the adjacent side streets, engines cutting one by one in a sequence that rolled down the column like a falling wave and ended in a silence so sudden and complete that its absence felt loud. 220 riders dismounted. In the amber glow of the hospital's exterior lighting, they stood. Leather cuts, skull patches, tattoos, scars, the full, unvarnished truth of who they were, and underneath it, something else. Something that had brought them here on a Wednesday night with their wallets empty and their faces set with singular purpose. A security guard appeared at the hospital's main entrance, a large man named Roy who was having the worst night of what had been, up to that point, a reasonably average career. He looked at the assembled mass in the parking lot, then looked at the radio in his hand, and appeared to be having a profound internal conversation about what to say into it. Jax walked forward, alone, toward the entrance. Roy positioned himself in the doorway and held up a hand. Sir, the facility is closed to non-medical visitors after 9. I need to see the administrator, Jax said. He was carrying a black canvas duffel bag in his right hand, the kind used for gym gear or travel. It was full, and it was heavy, and it made a particular sound when he set it on the ground in front of Roy. Tell him Iron Miller is here. He'll know who I am. Roy looked at the bag, then at Jax, then at the 200 people standing silently in the parking lot behind him. He stepped aside. The hospital lobby at 10:23 p.m. was occupied by a handful of overnight staff, 2 visitors in the waiting area, a janitor running a buffer machine in the far corridor, and Dr. Gerald Harris, who had been called from his office on the 2nd floor by a frantic receptionist and had descended the staircase with the confident bearing of a man who believes that authority is sufficient armor. He arrived in the lobby to find it occupied by Jax, and then, as the glass doors kept opening, by 50 more members of the chapter who filed in calmly and took up positions along the walls of the lobby, the waiting area, and both visible corridors. They didn't shout. They didn't touch anything. They simply stood there, enormous and present, leather and steel, filling every available space with their absolute certainty of purpose. The janitor turned off his buffer machine. The 2 visitors quietly gathered their things and moved to the far corner. The receptionist was already on the phone, voice very low. Eris stopped at the foot of the stairs. He looked at the lobby, at the sea of leather cuts and scarred faces, and then at Jax, who stood at the center of it all with the duffel bag in one hand and probably, a small stuffed bear in the crook of his other arm. Mr. Miller, Eris said. His voice was controlled. He was, to his credit, more composed than most would have been. This is a medical facility. I'll need everyone who is not here for medical purposes too. Jax crossed the lobby in 10 steps and set the duffel bag on the reception desk with a heavy, definitive thud. He unzipped it. The bag was full of cash. Banded bills in varying denominations. The organized mess of 62 men who had turned out their pockets and wallets and strong boxes. It was not a banker's neat stack of uniform bundles. It was real money, the unambiguous kind. $26,000 in bills of all sizes, a physical argument that could not be ignored or deferred or redirected into a policy conversation. Eris stared at it. $26,000, Jax said. Cash. Right now. You told Leo Reyes and Gwen that you needed $20,000 before you'd proceed with Lily's surgery. You have it. You have it plus $6,000. He looked at Eris with unblinking steadiness. Schedule the surgery. Eris's composure cracked slightly, not dramatically, just a hairline fracture. The expression of a man whose certainty about his own authority is coming into contact with a reality that doesn't share it. Mr. Miller, the appropriate channel for financial transactions is through our billing department, which opens at 8 a.m., and I cannot simply, Dr. Eris. The voice came from the side corridor. Everyone looked. 30 members of the chapter had arranged themselves on either side of the main corridor, 15 to a side, standing at rest but unmistakably present, creating a human avenue extending from the lobby toward the elevator bank. At the far end, the elevator door stood open. Dr. Marcus Webb, St. Carmichael's head of pediatric cardiology, stepped off the elevator. He was 60 years old, trim, gray-bearded, and had been paged from home 40 minutes earlier by Patricia, the charge nurse who had decided that some situations required a direct chain of command. He looked at the corridor of bikers, blinked once, and then looked at the faces lining both sides of the hall. Every single one of them turned toward him and bowed, not deeply, not theatrically, but with the quiet, deliberate gravity of men who mean it completely. A corridor of scarred and tattooed giants, bent in respect toward one cardiac surgeon. Dr. Webb looked at them for a moment. The lobby was utterly silent. Are you here for Lily? He asked the nearest one. Yes, sir, the man said. Webb looked toward the lobby. He looked at Eris. He looked at the duffel bag on the reception desk. Gerald, he said, and his voice carried the tone of a man who has been a physician for 35 years and has developed precisely zero patience for certain kinds of obstruction. The money is there. Schedule the surgery. Marcus, proper procedure requires. The child's condition deteriorated this afternoon. Webb's voice remained measured, but it had a quality in it like a blade being drawn. I've been trying to reach you for 4 hours. She needs this procedure tonight, if I can get my team in. The money is there. Your requirement is met, and I would like to know what possible administrative justification you intend to offer for further delay. The lobby was absolutely silent. Eris looked at the cash. He looked at Webb. He looked at Jax, who was watching him with the patient, unblinking attention of a man who has decided what will happen and is simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He looked at the corridor of men who had bowed to a surgeon. He paused. I'll need to contact billing. I'll have my assistant call them at home, Jax said. Right now, if you'd like. He paused one beat. Or you can go upstairs and tell a 7-year-old boy that his sister is going to be okay. A very long silence. Schedule the surgery. Eris said finally, to no one in particular, in the voice of a man who has just recalibrated his understanding of the room he's in. Jax looked at him for a moment longer, one of those quiet, comprehensive looks, and then he nodded. He turned and walked back through the lobby. Someone near the door held it open for him. He walked outside into the cool October air, and one by one the chapter followed. In the corridor, Dr. Webb adjusted his jacket and straightened his collar. He looked up the line of departing bikers. Thank you, he said. The man nearest to him, Diesel, 6'2", silver-streaked beard, hands that had spent 30 years working on engines, turned and looked at him. Just fix our girl, Doc, he said. The surgery began at 1:17 a.m. outside St. Carmichael Medical Center. 220 people settled in. They didn't leave. There was no discussion about it. It simply didn't occur to anyone to go. Bikes were moved off the road to the proper lot and the adjacent side streets. And then 220 people found places to be. On the front steps, on the curb, on the grass of the small decorative garden beside the main entrance, leaned against walls and fence rails and the sides of their own bikes. A convenience store 2 blocks away, whose owner had watched the procession arrive and made a quick and generous decision, sent a delivery over at midnight. Boxes of coffee, water, enough food for a small crowd. He wrote on the receipt, on the house. Good luck to the little girl. The chapter's treasurer tried to pay and was waved off 3 times before being allowed to leave a tip. There was no music, no raised voices. Ghost, the oldest member, 67 years old, who had been in the club since before many of the others were born, sat on the front steps with his hands clasped and his head slightly bowed. Anyone passing him might have taken him for a man in prayer, which he was. Tank sat beside Jax on the low stone wall at the entrance, drinking coffee in silence. The city moved around them, the occasional late taxi, a dog walker who gave the assembled crowd a very wide berth, a news van that pulled up, filmed for 20 minutes from a respectful distance, and eventually drove away. The night was cold and clear, the sky above the city a deep indigo scattered with the few stars that could be seen through the ambient light. The hospital's exterior lights cast everything in amber and shadow, and from a certain angle the whole scene. The hundreds of figures standing or sitting in quiet vigil, the row of motorcycles gleaming at the perimeter, the steady hum of the building's ventilation rising and falling, had the quality of something that would not be forgotten by those who saw it. Inside, Leo and Carmen were in the waiting room on the 4th floor. At some point past midnight, Leo stood up and went to the window. He could see down to the hospital's main entrance from there, and what he saw, the mass of people filling the steps and the lot and the curb, the occasional glow of a phone screen or a coffee cup, the absolute stillness of it all, stopped him cold. He stood at the window for a long time. Carmen came and stood beside him. She said nothing. After a while, she put her hand on his shoulder. Mr. Jacks kept his promise, Leo said quietly. Yes, Carmen said. A nurse came in at 3 a.m. and brought them hot chocolate from the break room, because Patricia had decided that warranted special measures. Leo accepted his with both hands and went back to his chair and sat very still and waited. The surgery was estimated at 4 to 6 hours. At 6:44 a.m., as the sky through the waiting room window was shifting from black to the dark, uncertain gray that precedes dawn, Dr. Webb came through the door. He was still in his surgical cap. His face was tired in the way that follows hours of sustained and precise effort, but it was carrying something else too. The particular satisfaction of a man who has just done the best thing his life trained him to do. She came through beautifully, he said. Carmen made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The release of something that had been held for a very long time. Leo sat very still. She's going to need 2 to 3 weeks of recovery, Webb continued, and careful follow-up care, but the valve replacement was clean. The repair is good. Her heart is. He paused. And he was a precise man who chose his words carefully, and what he chose was, her heart is strong. Leo stood up. He walked to the window. Below, in the gray pre-dawn light, the crowd was still there. Not all of them. A few had gone quietly over the course of the night, but most of them remained, scattered across the steps and the grass and the lot, the orange glow of coffee cups here and there in the dark. As Leo watched, the figure of Jax detached itself from the wall where it had been leaned and looked up. The distance was too great to see faces clearly, but something in the posture, the waiting quality of it, the way the figure seemed to be watching the window, made Leo understand that Jax had been doing this for a while, just keeping watch. Leo put his hand flat on the glass. Below, Jax raised one hand. 3 days later, Lily opened her eyes. The room was warm. There were sunflowers on the windowsill, yellow as a summer afternoon, in a green glass vase that caught the morning light. A get-well card on the nightstand had an improbable number of signatures in varying handwriting, some shaky, some precise, some accompanied by small drawings of motorcycles that ranged from detailed to extremely optimistic. Lily looked at the ceiling for a while. Then she turned her head. The first thing she saw was Barnaby. He sat on the nightstand, one glass eye, one missing ear, patchwork belly, exactly as he always had. But he was wearing something new, a tiny leather vest, sewn from a scrap of black leather, with a miniature version of the chapter's winged skull patch stitched carefully onto the back. The stitching was imperfect, the work of large and unpracticed hands, but it was done with great care, every stitch deliberate, the way you'd stitch something you wanted to last. Lily looked at the vest for a long time. Then she looked at Leo, who was asleep in the chair beside her, his head on his arms on the edge of her mattress. She reached out and put her hand on top of his head, gently. He woke up immediately. For a moment they just looked at each other. "Hi," Lily said. Her voice was thin and rough at the edges from the breathing tube, but it was there, real and present and completely hers. "Hi," said Leo. And then he put his head back down on his arms and squeezed his eyes shut, and his shoulders shook once, and he didn't say anything else for a while. Lily picked up Barnaby and examined his vest with great thoroughness. She turned him over and looked at the patch. She turned him back. "That's new," she said. "He got promoted," Leo said, voice still muffled. "He's an honorary member now." "Of what?" "The best club in the world." Lily considered this, still holding Barnaby against her chest, and nodded with the grave satisfaction of someone who finds this entirely appropriate. Outside, the city moved through an ordinary Thursday, traffic and voices and the distant percussion of construction, and in the parking lot below, most of the bikes were gone. Most of them. One remained. When Leo eventually went to the window, he saw Jax leaning against his motorcycle in the morning sun, the Harley repaired now, new brake line, shining clean in the October light. He was in his full cut, patches and all, finishing a cup of coffee with the unhurried ease of a man who has nowhere more important to be. He looked up, the way he seemed to always know when Leo was at the window. Leo raised his hand. Jax raised his coffee cup in salute, a gesture so small and so complete that it closed something, the way the last line of a long story closes. Then he finished his coffee, set the cup on the wall, pulled on his helmet, and swung a leg over the saddle. The Road King's engine turned over with a sound like controlled thunder. One by one, from around the parking lot's perimeter, other engines answered. 4, 6, 10 bikes that had been waiting quietly. Their riders leaned against fences and walls, watching their own windows. Jax looked up once more at the boy in the fourth-floor window. He brought 2 fingers to his helmet in a slow, deliberate salute. Then he pulled out of the lot and into the street, and the formation followed, and the sound of them moved through the city like a tide going out, filling every space, rolling through the downtown streets with a low, resonant thunder that people would feel in their chests and not quite be able to explain afterward. Just a sound, some of them would say, like a storm moving through, but the sky was perfectly clear. A few blocks away, a woman pushing a stroller paused on the sidewalk as the procession passed. Her daughter, maybe 4 years old, bundled in a red coat, stood on the stroller's footrail and pointed. Motorcycles, the girl said. Yes, her mother said. A lot of motorcycles. A lot, her mother agreed. Are they good or bad? Her mother watched the column roll past, the leather and the chrome, the skull patches, the scarred faces under helmets, and she thought about the news footage from the night before, the image that had been running on every local station. 200 people standing in the pre-dawn gray outside a hospital, not a voice raised, not a piece of litter on the ground, just the vigil. I think, she said slowly, there's something in between. The best kind of something in between. The last bike rolled past, and the sound faded, leaving the street quiet and ordinary and somehow wider than it had been before. Back in the fourth-floor room, Lily held Barnaby against her chest and listened to her own heart, steady, repaired, strong, and watched her brother sit back down in his chair and pull the maintenance schedule from his pocket and begin reading it aloud to her, very seriously, as though Barnaby's well-being depended on full disclosure. Sunday, fluff the stuffing by pressing gently on the stomach area. Monday through Saturday, no maintenance required unless there is visible dirt, in which case use a damp cloth. Do not use soap. Do not put him in the dryer. Lily laughed, a real laugh, a full one, the first in a very long time, and the sound of it was better than engines, better than thunder, better than anything Leo had heard in as long as he could remember. He kept reading. Outside, the sunflowers faced the window,